Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the next in our sessions of CME Palooza Spring 2016. I am Scott Kober, the co-producer of CME Palooza, and I want to thank you for joining our session, our 11 o'clock session, entitled No Hail Marys Required, Novel Ways to Use Data for Continual Program Assessment. This session is being sponsored by the Global Academy for Medical Education. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. I would first like to thank our sponsors, our gold sponsor Genentech, our silver sponsors Practicing Clinicians Exchange, Platform Q Health Education, Helio.com Education Lab, Global Academy for Medical Education, Forefront Collaborative, and ASIM. Our bronze sponsors, Vivacity Consulting, Vindico Medical Education, RMEI, PVI, Primary Care Network, Paradigm Medical Communications, Infograph Ed, Impact Education, Highmark CE, Educational Measures, CMEology, Clinical Care Options, and the Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning. So there's a few ways that you can ask questions during this and all of our CME Palooza sessions. You can use the Practicing Clinicians Exchange text line to send in a question to 267-6660-CME. You can click on the Google Plus Q&A link located at the bottom of each of our videos, and you can tweet your question to us using the CME Palooza hashtag. So finally, just to make it clear that the opinions, discussions, or conclusions discussed in this and all of our sessions are those of our presenters and do not represent a position or endorsement by any employer or parent company. And with that, I am going to turn things over to Dr. Eric Brady to start this session.
All right. Well, thanks, Scott. This was the concept for this session was something that Aaron Schwartz and I began to talk about at ASAF, which I think is probably a wonderful opportunity for people to come up with ideas to think about for the CME Palooza abstracts. I know several of my abstracts in the past have come from discussions that have happened there. But this, one of the unique things that we had felt like weren't really covered in any sort of depth in CME Palooza prior to this cycle was the concept of what happens when you try to analyze your overall program, and not just an individual activity or even a set of activities, but when you step back and try to figure out how to analyze your entire program, what's that look like? And so Aaron Schwartz, again, is one of my co-presenters today from Vivacity Consulting. So she and I initially began chatting about this, so I want to welcome her to the session today.
Thank you. Hi.
And then she had the suggestion that we incorporate Jackie Stelz-Lenarski from Providence St. Joseph's Health, who had some really great insights on this. And so as the three of us began to think about what does this look like, we kind of came up with an idea, how would this work, and then had these learning objectives. And we hope that by the close of the session today, you'll be able to step away and look at your individual programs and deploy some of these strategies that we'll talk about today in the course of your own program assessment. So I want to welcome Jackie to our program as well today.
Good morning, everyone.
Okay, so Scott, let's move forward this slide. And it really kind of starts out when we talk about program assessment. It starts with the mission statement. And in my mind, when I've talked about the mission statement with people in the past, it starts off with kind of talking about oftentimes in mission statements you'll see a purpose described that talks about who, what, why, and where. Particularly if you are a CME provider that's based in a specific institution. And then in some mission statements, but not all, we'll find details, the how. We'll talk about how we determine educational need, the types of activities that we're going to do, and then finally this last point, the measurements and the results. So let's go forward one slide. And one of the things that I have found in the past, and this is some survey data that it's a little dated now, but it's still, I think, very valid. There was a needs assessment survey done for Medical Association of Georgia meeting that I was a speaker at a couple of years ago. And we asked these questions, and the question at hand here was, which of the criteria are hardest for you to comply with? And we allowed people to respond and said a high degree of difficulty, a moderate degree of difficulty, or a low degree of difficulty. And so I plotted here just the high and moderate degrees of difficulty. And what we found was that 3 was one where again we're talking about the measurement of data that was above the 70th percentile of respondents, and not an insignificant number of respondents, but a number of respondents reporting that had either a moderate or high degree of difficulty. And then when we got into 11 and 12 and 13 and some of the higher level criteria, they also had that higher percentage of degrees of difficulty. So I want to stop just for a second and ask Aaron and Jackie, is this the experience that you see in your own settings or with some of the groups that you've worked with? Is this consistent with what people have shared with you? Are these the criteria that most people that you've worked with or you yourself have found most hard to comply with?
Well, I would say I work with a variety of provider types, hospital, medical society, and also medical education company. And I would say as long as the provider has the disclosure, identification, conflict management process down, which you kind of either do or you don't, then I would say this is probably accurate. So it seems to me like this is something people think about when it's time for reaccreditation.
Yeah. And I think that comes back to the whole point of no Hail Marys, right? I mean, I think that it's not atypical to find that there are providers, and hopefully this isn't you, but if you there are providers that really don't give a whole lot of thought to program analysis until they're entering the process of self-study. Jackie, any additional comments you'd add here, or does this look about right to you as well?
I think this looks about right. Erin and I are both part of a Southern California Medical Education Council, and I think among our colleagues we find this to be true, that these are the ones that people have most difficulty with.
Okay. Let's go forward a slide, Scott. Okay, so hopefully many of you that are in attendance today responded to the survey that we've been tweeting out over the course of the last several weeks, attempting to get survey data in. So this is fresher data. Unfortunately, the ends are smaller, but be that as it may, we're going to do the same thing here and just talk about this type of survey data that we collected in advance. Thought it'd be valuable for you to see it. And again, there's an opportunity. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the survey data as we get into some discussion of ways that you might analyze your program a little bit differently, and then a couple of specific case examples that Aaron and Jackie are going to bring into the fold. But we started out with asking people to rate their agreement or disagreement with these specific statements, and we said we had these two statements. My organization's program assessment process is comprehensive. We see our 40-ish% agreeing with that, 45 saying not really, and another 14 saying, oh, I'm not really sure. And then we also have the second statement. Mission statements should be global and should not have specific quantifiable goals. We have 20% of people who agree with that. We have 50% that disagree, meaning that that mission statements should have specific quantifiable goals. But we have a significant percentage here, a full fourth, that are really kind of unsure on this topic. So, Jackie, Aaron, I invite you into the conversation at this point. What do you think about this data?
Well, in my experience, I think this is pretty true. It's pretty divided about whether a mission statement should be global or not. I think that people find kind of the safe way is to have it be global, and then there's nothing that they're held accountable for at the end of the program assessment. I think it's a little riskier to have a mission statement be specific because it's a lot of work. You have to measure your data. You have to be involved with your quality department or whatever it is that you're trying to measure. So I think it is more difficult. So that may be what's underlying the choice sometimes.
Yeah.
And I have, since we've been talking about this, I've been bringing this subject up a lot in different CME committees, and I am receiving some pushback, probably for the reason Jackie mentioned, that no, we want a mission statement to be global. So, interesting, there is resistance. I think that, as we'll show, there can be a lot of amazing results if you do make some specific goals, either in your mission statement or in some type of addendum that you add to it.
Yeah, I'll say my personal perspective on this is that I have run into providers in the past that have said that they'd rather not include very many quantifiable goals in a mission statement, because in order to change a mission statement, I have to gather a huge committee of people, and I have to have a whole lot of stakeholder buy-in to make even the most minor tweaks to what my mission statement says. And so I think that may be part of a root cause for why people are a little hesitant to put quantifiable goals into their statements. But be that as it may, I mean, a lot of this comes back to Criterion 12, which reads that the provider gathers data. You can read this. I don't need to read it to you, but there is an assumption that to meet Criteria 12, you will do a program-based analysis that allows you to assess the degree that the mission statement has been met. And my personal perspective on that is that if you don't have quantifiable goals, how in fact are you measuring? What is it that you are doing to determine the degree to which your mission statement has been met? Which is one of the reasons that I'm such a strong advocate, and I think everybody on this panel is a strong advocate for considering our data from activities and other data points that we have to both analyze our program, but also to set goals that we know what we're measuring ourselves against. Let's go to the next slide. I'm not seeing an advance, Scott. I'm still on slide 9.
Did we lose Scott?
I don't know. I wonder if we lost Scott.
Uh-oh. Hopefully we're alive still, because otherwise we're talking to ourselves.
Amy is no longer presenting. We've had a hiccup.
Oh dear.
First time I've seen that happen. I'm sure he'll be back in a second.
Okay. Do you want to talk then? Do you have the slides that you could talk to without him here?
We're not live.
Oh, I see. I still have a live button in the top corner.
Oh, yeah, we're live. Okay.
Oh, here he comes back.
I'm going to load the presentation on my other screen.
Okay.
So the next slide actually turns out to be some survey data that we need to be able to display. I wonder. See, I used to know how to do this.
Sorry.
Oh, there's
Sorry
Scott.
about that, everyone.
Oh, it sounds like he's having internet connection problems.
Yep.
Is he located in Wisconsin, where they got a big dump of snow?
So Scott, I'm going to screen share and because I can remember how. Hold on just a second. Okay, can everybody? I guess I don't know for certain if everybody can see this, but
can you see, Eric? Can you see the slides on your screen right now?
I can see the slides on my screen right now. I'm attempting to share.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, so
can you see them where I am?
I can.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll continue forward unless Scott, you want me to go back to what we were trying to do there. Okay. All right.
No,
so
go ahead,
this is some survey data that we collected from our survey that we did in advance, and so we wanted to try to figure out exactly what other folks were doing in support of their program assessment. So we came up with 4 kind of common scenarios that we were aware of people using, and we asked about these. Do you share survey your stakeholders for opinions? So kind of a very subjective, soft type of measurement. Do you combine data from credit-bearing activities for analyses? Do you routinely review that data with your facilitators and faculty? And do you publish that data? So again, you can kind of see how this breaks out, right? With we have most respondents, well, at least over 50%, not quite at 60%, indicating that they do surveys of their stakeholders. We had over 70% indicating that they combine data from credit-bearing analysis activities for analysis. Slightly less than 50% that were reviewing that data with facilitators and faculty, and less than a quarter that were publishing that analysis for learners and stakeholders review. So I'll again invite Erin and Jackie to say, you know, is this consistent with what you have seen in your programs or in clients that you've worked with, or providers that you've worked with?
No, I think this is better data than I would have expected to see. I think the majority of providers that I am aware of primarily send out the results of their activity surveys to the people who are involved, and maybe talk about it at a medical education committee, but that's about the extent of it. There isn't a whole lot further. I mean, and I don't mean everybody, but that I would say in general, that's what most people do.
Yeah, I would agree. And I've seen both sides of the poll. I've seen people who have actually just started individual activity evaluation. I've seen people not return activities back to their faculty, a summary. Yeah. And then, you know, I've seen the other where it goes up to med exec. You know, there's an executive statement that at the end of the year goes up to the leadership talking about the program. So I guess I've seen, you know, both extremes.
I think from my perspective, I'm surprised by the second data point here, the combined data from credit-bearing activities for analysis. When we think about the overall program, that number seems high to me. Because I've worked with a number of different providers that seems to be a very novel concept when I've you know, broached that idea with them. So I generally feel like that number is probably a little high and is probably on the backs of a smaller sample size for this specific question. And I think it's an interesting finding, certainly from that this group is certainly indicating that they do combine their data from individual activities for program analysis. You know, I think a lot of it is, some of it may be just an inconsistency in what we describe a program and an activity as. I think there's many people in the industry that think of a program as aligned to a grant proposal, which is maybe a collection of a few activities. Rather than a program being the summation of all the activities that our CME department are put together over the course of some span of time. Okay, so let's move on. The thing this is one of the things that I really advocate for to get around that spot where we have providers that say, you know, modifying my mission statement is not as simple as I don't completely own it. I have to pull together a large group of stakeholders in order to make that happen. So one of the things I've advocated for with a lot of providers is the concept of building a mission metrics addendum, which is the type of document that you could state expectations for activity level results in. And I advocate for using last year's data to establish a baseline where you would state goals for, you know, either overall goals for in terms of participation or satisfaction, or goals for change that you intend to see across your entire program. Again, by rolling up data from activities. So you can state goals for all sorts of different things. You know, and so we asked this question as well in the survey. With your mission statement, of course, assuming that you have quantitative goals. What do you have quantitative goals for? And we found that the largest percentage of people responded that knowledge was something that they had quantitative goals for in their mission statement. Other of Moore's levels were found to have lower percentages of people that were stating quantitative goals. Again, I'll just open it up. Erin, Jackie, in your experience, does this look consistent with what you've seen other providers put into their mission statements, or not? I guess is really the question.
Well, I think it goes back to what you were showing before about global versus individual goals. So this is consistent, and most people are looking at knowledge, and again, staying away from the metrics of performance. So yeah, this is pretty consistent, I think.
Okay.
I have heard of providers adding in a, we expect to see 25% of our attendees make a meaningful intent to change at the result of our activity. And that is sort of, I think, the first baby step towards a quantifiable goal.
Sure. Scott, I think I heard you trying to get in. Is there a question?
No, I was going to say, Eric, if you want to bring yourself back up on video, if you want to stop sharing the slides, I think that's fine.
Okay, I'll do that now.
And I thought, Aaron, you had a good point that it really depends on where the CME program is in its development, because you could start out saying we need to collect more evaluations after an activity, and that's a fine metric.
Yeah.
I think what we would hope to see is people moving along year to year, that they start branching out to more specific quantifiable goals. But I think it's perfectly fine for a program to look at what they need to change, and it may be something that seems very minor, but it's along the continuum of moving toward improvement.
Yeah. So I get into a couple of examples here before we get to the point of having Aaron and Jackie talk through a couple of more specific case studies. But these are old examples that I've used from former life on the provider side. The types of very specific numerical types of goals that you can state. Satisfaction is actually a pretty easy one, where you could say that across our entire program we have an expectation that activity respondents are going to agree that the activity was fair, balanced, and we're going to have an expectation that across the entire life of our program, or the entire year of our program, that we're going to find that's true greater than or equal to 95% of the time. Now, what that doesn't say is that we may have an activity where the overall learner population thought that it wasn't fair balanced, and that 80% of them called it out. And what that allows for is that when we sum up all of our activities, it's basically acknowledgement that we may not be perfect, but we have this stated goal that when we sum up all of our activities, that greater than 95% of them are going to be fair balance. Maybe that's a low number for you, but that's where I would encourage you to look at your own data and say, we do really well at this. It's good to have a goal, just so that we're checking in against it. This example set has a couple of other potential satisfaction metrics. Let's move on to the next slide and take a look at a couple of at a competence metric. This is where we can get really specific, right? So you'll note that this is one that I've used in the past, and I'm being again very specific about what the goal is. So this is a goal that was written for outcomes tools that allow for match data. Okay, when we're talking about items collected on a 7-point rating scale, right? So you could have this, you could have a different goal for 5-point rating scales if you do both within your program, or you could have a separate goal for unmatched or pooled data sets. So you can have all sorts of flavors of different types of goals. But again, what this looks like is for 80% of the items where we assess using a 7-point rating scale, that we're going to see at least 0.8 change versus baseline. So that seems a little nebulous until you see what it begins to look like when it's tracked. And hopefully this is coming through cleanly enough on screen. But the idea here is that you have a given activity. So if you're just looking at that first row of data, if you will, the activity code of 8736, right? Completely arbitrary number. Let's say on a rating scale, you had two items that you assessed on a and in this case this is really more of a 5-point rating scale that I've mocked up. But let's say you had a baseline of 3.6, you had a baseline of 4 on your 2 items, and then where were you at post? Well, you went from a 3.64 to 4, and you went from 4 to 4.14. So then in the next column, you calculate the difference, and then you have an if-then statement that says, was my mission goal met for these items? Well, no. And maybe you have a p-value goal that you want to say that you're going to have some number that achieves statistical significance. But in the end, what you're going to do is down at the bottom, you're going to what you see on here, and generally I do this on a different tab just so that I'm not trying to continually add more rows. But you can set up queries for yourself that count the number of measurements that you've taken, and then how many of them have met your mission metric, and then you calculate the percentage that are meeting that metric. And so that's where that 80% number comes in that I showed on the previous slide. So you've got 15 total measurements here. 10 of them met our goal, and so 10 divided by 15 is giving you 67%. And if I'm looking at this on a regular basis, then I can say, all right, we're not consistently meeting our goal here, so we need to look at how we improve. And so that gets you, compliant with both Criterion 12 and gets you into the realm of 13, because you're beginning to think about how do we improve upon our program. And you can imagine that if you're collecting, additional data points in here, you could be documenting those programs by what department hosts them, or by which faculty person was involved in them, so that you give yourselves the ability to kind of really keep an eye on how your program is doing, both on a global level, but then but you can really refine it and take a look at how individual departments or individual faculty are doing. And that's just, and again, that's kind of a broad example. But what we're going to do next is get into a couple of very specific case studies that Aaron and Jackie have brought along. But we should hit pause just briefly. And Scott, I don't know if there are any questions that have come up at this point.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, then, so the rest of this will focus on a couple of very specific case examples. I think Aaron is going to focus predominantly on knowledge and competence types of goals and mission metrics that you can take a look at, and then Jackie's going to look at some higher level stuff that I think people will find really interesting. So I'm going to give way to Aaron at this point.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to give an example from one of my clients. The specialty society is called SAGES, and I want to acknowledge the fact that all of this work could not have been done without the very active participation of the Continuing Education Committee, headed by Drs. Daniel Scott, Simone Bergman, Tim Farrell, John Page, Elizabeth McElmore, as well as my fellow SAGES staff member, Yumi Hori. So I just wanted to give you if you could go back one more slide. This is a snapshot of what the SAGES CME accredited program looks like, practicing physician attendees. And as you can see, maybe the color's a little funny, but the light blue is our annual meeting attendance in a year. And then the dark blue is our SAGES University attendance. And we have over 100 online 0.25 credit activities. So we only get about a couple hundred people taking a lot of activities each year, and this is 2015 data. So the majority of our educational program is wrapped up in our annual meeting, as I think most specialty societies are. If you could go to the next slide. So I wanted to walk you through a history of our overall program assessment. So as you saw, our annual meeting is sort of the big beast for our program, and like most specialty societies, we really focused on the annual meeting for a long time. So in 2008, we formed an assessment task force, and we appointed them to really delve into the concept of analyzing knowledge, competence, and maybe look at performance change. And then we provided those results in an email to the program chair, and this kind of goes back to that survey that we did of all of you, was do you provide this feedback back to your stakeholders? You know, we were sending it via email and hoping that they would read it. Not sure that's the best method. So then through 2009 and 2013, we made improvements to our assessment. We developed this concept of a learning theme where our attendees would select the the track at the annual meeting that they were following, and they would take some knowledge-based questions based on that learning track, and then answer confidence, case volume, and intent to change based on the learning theme they selected. And then we asked in 2011 for our GAP task force to write a practice GAP manuscript, which we then published in our journal, Surgical Endoscopy. And that was a big step forward because in our minds that was really providing this data, assessment data and analysis of the gaps of our learners to a broader audience. So then in 2013 through 2016, we also got the opportunity to get onto the agenda of the program committee at the executive program planning meeting. And this is a big step forward in our sort of overall assessment, because we were able to now provide the data of our assessment to the people who are planning it in person, and that seemed to make a big difference. And then more importantly, in my mind, in 2014 we started to roll up the data that we were getting from the SAGES University evaluation results, which our assessment is essentially knowledge and intent to change assessment. So we started incorporating that as well, both in our GAP manuscript and also in our presentation to the executive program planning committee. And so our overall assessment then became a lot more robust in my mind, because we're not just focusing on the annual meeting, we're including data from our online activities. And we, although we do have sort of benchmarks and goals in mind, to be honest, at the moment we don't have a quantifiable metric in our mission statement. We have these thoughts, we have sort of elements that would raise eyebrows, but we haven't put that into play as of yet. So that is a goal in process that we're working on in 2016. And if you can move to the next slide. So these are the three elements of our annual assessment, and this is what we've been using, I'd say, for the past 3 years. So we use the overarching learning themes applied to all the educational elements, activities. Both the SAGES U and the annual meeting go into this. The assessment task force is responsible for looking at the evaluation data and presenting it, and then the GAPS task force is responsible for translating that into practice gaps that the session chairs then use as they develop their sessions for the next annual meeting or the next SAGES U module, and for writing manuscripts. And if you can go to the next slide. So this is just a screenshot of the report that we printed in Surgical Endoscopy. And then the next slide is, this is the journal article that we printed in 2014 that does include the SAGES University data wrapped up in it. We call it a GAPS manuscript, but it really is kind of both assessment and GAPS, because you can't, in my opinion, it's hard to have one without the other. Mm-hmm. And then this is the just a screenshot of 6 of the slides that Dr. Page presented, results of the 2015 post-meeting analysis. And I love how he really calls things out. His first slide is the highlights, and he kind of puts punch marks and things like that to really bring it alive for the people who are thinking about the next year's meeting. And he circles things, what learning themes are the most popular for our attendees. When we are asking knowledge-based questions, what are the wrong answers? What are the top desired changes overall? So he really tries to bring it to a level that the people planning can sink their teeth into, and can understand which direction they need to head. And then this is just a screenshot of what we call our gap bank, where we put our gaps, where people can access them when they're planning upcoming activities. And so we require session design forms for every session at the annual meeting and for SAGES U activities, and they have to draw from our gap bank. It's not mandatory, but almost everybody does. in order to plan the next meeting. So again, it's the concept of the circular planning and making sure that we're addressing our own learners' needs, and by doing this big overall program assessment every year, I think that we're better able to really direct our learning towards our learners' needs. But as I mentioned, our goal for 2016 is really to kind of go deeper and take what we've done and then mark out those lines. What do we expect from our learners? Do we expect to see just, you know, a large percentage of people indicating intent to change, or do we expect more than that? And the answer is we expect more than that, but we've never really put that in black and white. So that's our goal.
I really love the paradigm shift that you described there. You know, where you get in, where you I'm sure in year one when you first started to try to look at what did we see from wrong answers in the past. I'm sure there was this aha moment for a lot of people that was kind of like, oh, right. Because I think we've all been in that situation where we've had a course director or a faculty member say, no, I don't believe that that's really an educational need, and then you have some data to put in front of them that kind of stops them in the tracks and go, oh, okay, well, if that's the way learners are really responding, then okay, maybe we should spend more time on this topic. And it sounds like, you know, you've shifted that paradigm to where, you know, learners that are involved with SAGES understand that we're going to see what we saw last year as we enter into the planning process and really begin to close that loop.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the ownership. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, there is that. It's interesting too because depending on the specialty of the program chairs, they have their own you know, slant. So if their specialty is colon, they want to do everything colon, and we have to show them that colon is one of the 4 learning themes always brought up, but there are 3 others that you also have to focus on.
Yeah.
You know, so that helps too. And even when you look at our online activities, the number of people that are taking colon match almost exactly to what the learning theme choice selection is from our annual meeting.
Okay. All right. Scott, anything we need to stop and respond to?
I don't think so right now. So if Jackie wants to go ahead with her case example, that'd be great.
Great.
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. So I'm the manager of continuing medical education at a medical center in Burbank, California. It's about a 400-bed facility, and we're part of a Providence Health and Systems, which is mainly on the West Coast, 35 hospitals and many other clinics. And it's a Catholic-based system that's really embedded in a mission for the poor and vulnerable. And so we really try to align our CME program with the values and the mission of the institution. So I think that is really what fuels our CME program. I wanted to give an example of a cultural diversity issue that we've had at our institution, and I want to actually go through kind of our 3-prong program assessment. The first is evaluating the individual activities and seeing if we're meeting the practice gaps. The second is the overall program alignment to our mission. And then the third is, you know, if there are any challenges or barriers that we have to look at going forward. So the first slide, I apologize, it's difficult to read, but this is an example of our individual activity evaluation. And this happened to be an activity that we had regarding transgender teens and the difficulty that they face in their health care, either through feeling misunderstood or feeling fear of approaching the healthcare system. And as it happens in California a lot, we actually had an assembly bill back in 2006 that actually mandated that every CME activity include some form of cultural linguistic diversity element. And just recently, that was brought in to include transgender or LGBT issues. So, you know, we tried to align that, and it was very aligned actually with the mission of our addressing our poor and vulnerable population. So the activity was held in December. There were some intent to change, a few, not many, but then we do an annual survey looking at a summary of activities, and I was kind of surprised, but also kind of pleased to see that there were some comments about people being a little bit more open to transgender issues, to being, maybe more sensitive culturally. So even though there were just a few comments about it, I think that does show that there was an impact, and that is one way that we look at if our program is aligning. So we do that for quite a few activities, but I just wanted to bring up that one because it's kind of specific to our area in a lot of ways, and we want to be looking at the population that we serve. So I believe the next slide okay, so now I wanted to talk about how we look at our overall program in terms of how we're aligning with our quality department. Again, we're in a medical center. We want to show value to our stakeholders, which includes our leadership team and our regional leadership team. I kind of have a perfect match in how we're aligned at our institution. I report directly to our chief medical officer, who is responsible for patient safety and quality. He also has others on his direct report team, including the Director of Quality, the Director of Professional Staff, Director of Infection Prevention, and the Director of Case Management Clinical Social Work. So we meet monthly, and I'm in the midst of sharing what's happening in the institution in terms of quality and infection prevention and other things. So it's a perfect match in terms of being that aligned with the Chief Medical Officer. So in the next slide, this is my perfect match. On your left is my boss, our Chief Medical Officer, and I love that his socks and tie don't match, but we still are a perfect match. And next to him is our CME chairman, who's been in that position basically as a volunteer for 25 years. So that's Dr. Skip Line. The Chief Medical Officer is Dr. Nick Testa, and they are a perfect match. They collaborate a lot. They're good friends. So I think that is important to look at. If you feel like your program's not working, it could be the way it's aligned or who your stakeholders are. So I feel like we're in a good situation to accomplish a lot because of that match. So I wanted to present our 2014 mission statement, and the years following look pretty similar. We have the four elements: the purpose, content, areas, target audience, and types of activities, which really don't change much. One thing to look at again is if you look in the purpose, we do have that IMQ cultural linguistic competency standard, saying that we will address that. And we also talk about the core value of respect as part of our institution. So I think that's important to include in your purpose. What makes your program unique? What is it that your values are? And so we did put that in our purpose. So under expected results, I guess this is kind of the the really high-level poll that we were talking about. We do like to see that we address the clinical priorities of our institution and our region, and this is what has been cascaded down from the system office to be accomplished in our quality department. So if we are going to show our value as education, we want to be aligned with those clinical priorities. And this is not to say that a couple activities are going to change and make the real difference, but if we're part of that conversation, I think we can claim that we've provided value. So in 2014, this is what the system is looking at, and to be honest, 15 and 16 look very similar because these are ongoing issues for the hospital. We did add on about there being a new vision for Providence Health and Service, that we're creating healthier communities together, and so we do investigate other data, but we're mainly focused on those quality priorities.
So let's talk about.
So I'm going to now show a video that represents my perfect match. This is a chief medical officer who is a very comfortable presenter who came 2 years ago and said, you get good attendance at your CME program. I want to be there and present some of our data. This is the way for me to get in touch with the medical staff. So he knocked on my door and said, I want to present data when you have things that align with what we're looking at. So sepsis is a really big issue. I think the Patty Duke death kind of made people more aware of how serious sepsis is and how prevalent it can be. So the next video is going to give an example of our chief medical officer taking a couple minutes before a main lecture on sepsis and showing our data. And along with that, we also try to provide a story, sometimes a safety story that really hits home and kind of brings it all together about what we're doing as a CME program. So this is Dr. Nick Testa.
So let's talk about sepsis. Today, Dr. Clint Coyle is going to be talking to us about current management of sepsis. But as with our CME series, I think it's the most valuable to talk about the disease process when we can anchor it in our performance here at Providence St. Joe's. So all of you who take care of patients here have been part of the sepsis campaign that has been going on well before I ever got here. It's important, though, that we look at our recent statistics because we've had some change. Over the last 2 years, the sepsis mortality has consistently been good here at Providence St. Joe's. If you look at our observed over expected with a target of less than 1, prior to December, we were consistently well below that 1 mark. We'll tell you that from January onwards, we've seen the data become somewhat less stable, and you'll see a trend upwards where we are well above the 1 mark. So we are seeing more deaths secondary to sepsis here at Providence St. Joe's. This really probably comes back to 2 areas specifically. The first one I want to call your attention to is how many patients we identify here at this hospital with sepsis. So this is a little bit busy, so let me walk you through it. Here's Providence St. Joe's. This is 2012, 2013, and then year-to-date 2014. And then we see Holy Cross, Tarzana, Little Company of Mary. This is just our raw number of patients that we diagnose with sepsis here at the facility. If you look at our numbers for 2012 and 2013 and then compare us to a hospital like Tarzana, you'll see they have plus 600 each year. We had 409 and 558. Tarzana operates probably about a 3/4 census to us. They have about 150 patients. We operate closer to 200 to 210. So when I look at this data, I have to make the first assumption that we are probably underdiagnosing sepsis here at the facility. So for us to really be able to treat sepsis aggressively, we have to make sure we're maximizing the diagnosis. The other thing I will call out is if you look at our performance year to date, we're at 255 cases diagnosed year to date. That's about 50 less cases than we diagnosed last year to date. So we appear to also be diagnosing fewer cases. So part of really conquering sepsis and making sure we maximize the treatment is making sure we're identifying all of those patients. The next portion of this is when we look at our individual bundle management. So those critical elements, fluids, antibiotics, lactate, are we getting those measures to the patients in a timely fashion? When we look at our overall bundle compliance, again, this is split up by years, by months. You'll see our overall bundle compliance still for all elements is under 40%. For the 3-hour portion of the bundle, it's higher. It's closer to 60%, but for the 6-hour portion, it's still lower, closer to 40%. So we are not treating all of our patients as aggressively as we could. If you look at the bottom statistics, I'm not going to go into those to detail, but you see the same thing. Of those patients that expired, few of them actually met the bundle compliance. Of those that survived, more of them met the bundle elements. So with that said, I'm going to have Dr. Coyle come up in just a moment and walk you through where we are with managing sepsis as far as diagnosing it and then the aggressive treatment elements of it. That said, I want to take one brief moment. Whenever we get a chance to anchor these lectures in data, it's great. But the most important thing is anchoring it in a patient experience. Jen Fangani, who's our director of marketing here, mother was a patient at the facility and was diagnosed with sepsis and managed here. So she just wants to take a second and explain to you what the family's experience was here at the facility.
Good afternoon. First off, I want to thank you for allowing me to come and share this story. I know some of you may have already heard this story at one of the nursing mandatory meetings earlier this year, but I'm fortunate to be born here at Providence St. Joseph Medical Center. I now work on the 5th floor of Providence St. Joseph Medical Center, so I can honestly say that this is my home. My mother has had a series of health issues throughout her life, and she's an incredibly strong and resilient woman. She's had over 32 major surgeries, so we've spent a whole lot of time in medical centers here and also at academic medical centers when that was warranted. Through all of that, my father had never even had to call 911. Everything was something that we could manage or something we could handle or something that we could direct in some way or another. So imagine my surprise when I came to work one morning and I was here for an early morning disaster drill, had my public information officer vest on, and all of a sudden my phone rang. And it was about probably 7:45, which is unusual to be getting a call from your dad. And he said, "Honey, I'm calling because I couldn't wake your mom up this morning, and I had to call 911, and we're here in your emergency room." And I said, "Dad, I'm on my way." Within 20 seconds, the other people that were in the drill kind of heard about what was going on, and Kevin Traber followed me down to the emergency room. I got down to the emergency room. Mom was in a room. There was a lot of activity, a lot of bustle. I said, "Look, I don't want to get in the way, but I want to know what's going on so that I can explain it to my dad and I can explain it to my family. They're counting on me." So they said, "You're welcome to go in and see your mom if you'd like to." I went in and saw Mom. I put my hand on her arm, leaned down to her ear, and I said, "Mom, I just want you to know that I'm here." You have to understand that my mom's skin was cold. She was not responsive to me. It was an incredibly terrifying moment. In all of those surgeries and all of those procedures, I'd never really been scared. So I decided I needed to step back and let people do their job and do what they needed to do. Long story short, Kevin and the emergency room team kept me up to speed on everything that was going on. My mom wound up in the intensive care unit. She was ventilated. She couldn't talk. I wasn't even sure if she knew that we were there. During the course of a couple of days, I would go and visit often because I still had work to do upstairs here, and I was trying to keep my family pulled together. Fortunately for my mom, and I say this in all honesty, she had been diagnosed with sepsis. Now, I had been in Ops Council meetings, I'd been to CME committee meetings. I knew that we were working on a sepsis bundle. I wasn't sure exactly how that would impact my life and my world. But here, my mom was in the ICU. She'd been diagnosed with sepsis. And because you had the bundle and because you implemented all the protocols quickly, on about the 10th day that I went into the ICU, I walked in and I saw that there was nothing in the bed. There were no sheets on the bed. Mom was not in the bed. And my heart stopped. And I thought, surely if something had happened, they would have called me. Why didn't they call me? And as I stood there, I scanned over, and there was my mom sitting in a jerry chair eating lunch. And she said, "Boy, am I glad to see you." And I thought, you have no idea how glad I am to see you. So I say all of this because I want to remind everyone, and I know you've dedicated your lives to medicine and healthcare, but I just want to remind you that when we're talking about numbers or we're talking about OE ratios, we're talking about families, we're talking about loved ones, mothers, sisters, brothers, and the work you do here is absolutely critical. It's so important. And I thank you very much for your time today.
So I think that's very compelling. that we look at metrics and we look at data, but it's really about the patients. It's really about the poor and vulnerable. It's really about why we're doing this. What's the value of CME? So, the last slide is showing our data, that we did do some improvement in our overall sepsis data. But again, the bottom line is, yeah, we're looking at data, we're looking at metrics, but it's about the patient experience. And I think when we look at our overall program, we have to look at, how are we doing? What are we providing to our institution, our organization, to make this a better experience for patients?
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you very much, Jackie, and thank you, Eric and Aaron. I think we're just about out of time. So I wanted to remind people who are watching this and any of the CME Palooza sessions that there is a quick survey available at the top of the live link. We are giving out Amazon gift cards to folks who provide their email address, so we hope that you will participate. And once we end this session here in a couple seconds, folks who are viewing this live will need to refresh their browser, and our next session will start here at the top of the hour momentarily. So once again, thank you, Eric, thank you, Aaron, thank you, Jackie, and we'll see everyone again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.